We all love a good pro wrestling return, whether it's a guy coming back from a long injury or someone who spent time in another promotion but he or she's going to make their way home. Pro wrestling returns sell tickets and they can get people excited for the future. For every Shawn Michaels, Rock, Sting and Austin return though, you've also got a fair portion of superstars who didn't fare quite as well during their comebacks to TV, and that's what we're going to be exploring today: horrible wrestling returns. I'll be covering returns that went instantly bad and returns that went down the toilet with each passing week. I'll be covering both returns from injury and complete company returns, so basically if a guy or girl was off TV for an extended period of time for whatever reason, I'm going to accept it as a pro wrestling comeback. So let's do it. Prince Albert, real name Matt Bloom, served as a mid-card guy while working for the WWF during the Attitude Era, and a pretty reliable one at that. He didn't exactly set the world on fire and he wasn't going to headline WrestleMania anytime soon, but you can't really complain about his work either. A good hand, brother. A good hand with a hairy back. After being part of the X Factor faction and the Zoo crew, he changed his name to A-Train thanks to persuasion from Paul Heyman. And then, in 2005, Matt took himself to Japan where he competed in All Japan for a year and then New Japan for around 3 years. Renamed Giant Bernard, or Bernard, depending on which part of the world you're from, Matt had a pretty successful run in Japan and he learned a lot while wrestling in the land of the rising sun. So, in 2012, Matt re-signed with the WWE, and on the March 19th episode of Raw, a vignette aired that let us know what Matt was going to do upon his return. He'd be playing the role of Lord Tensai. You see, Japanese culture was now running through the former Prince Albert's veins. He had seemingly ditched his American upbringing and now he was a full-blown samurai, or a full-blown weeb, whatever suits. He had face tattoos that looked like tire tracks running over his face, and worst of all, the commentators tried to sell it like Tensai was a huge deal, a new warrior and an unstoppable force from the East. Matt Bloom had a pretty distinctive look. He worked in the WWE or WWF when the company was benefiting from a lot of viewership, so fans knew the guy straight away as Albert, and of course, fans rejected Tensai by chanting the name Albert throughout his matches. The WWE tried to push Tensai pretty hard. He got wins over John Cena and WWE champion CM Punk, but fans were not going to buy into this new gimmick, and in under a year, he was dancing in lingerie while being paired up with Brodus Clay. Yeah, Lord Tensai was eventually put in a tag team called Tons of Funk. Brilliant. This one stings a bit more than Lord Tensai for me personally because I really like Brian Christopher as a performer, especially when he was too sexy Brian Christopher. It's difficult for me to catch up on his work in Memphis because all I've really got are the shows uploaded to YouTube, and although I'm super grateful for the folks who upload old shows, sometimes it's hard to follow the timeline of events due to the lack of dates or even lack of show names. Anyway, in the WWE, Christopher was released in the summer of 2001 because, no joke, he got caught being an international drug smuggler, and Brian was pretty much done in the WWE. He did make a brief return in 2004, but he was released again in a matter of weeks. In 2011, in the middle of the god-awful Jerry Lawler and Michael Cole television feud, Cole brought Christopher back. The idea here was that Cole wasn't going to talk bad about Jerry's family because, instead, Jerry's family was going to talk bad about Jerry. And when the Too Cool music played and Brian made his way to the ring, crickets. Fucking painful, cringy crickets. Now, we're in an era here when asking WWE fans to pop, even just a little, was like asking them to invade Poland. The roar of the crowd had disappeared during this era, and it was only really reserved for the absolute top tier competitors. It's not that no one knew who Brian was, it was just difficult for them to care, seeing as Grandmaster Sexay had been gone too long, and on top of that, he was getting himself involved in a poor storyline that no one cared about. I'm not saying Brian Christopher should have gotten a Road Warrior pop either, but my god, we don't even get a smattering of applause here, and worse still, Brian's acting like the crowd are well into his old Too Cool dance routine, and so is Michael Cole. The promo Brian cut was awkward. He said Jerry was a bad father, and Brian said he was ashamed to be Jerry's son. Jerry, meanwhile, said Brian was a bigger screw-up than Charlie Sheen. Terrible stuff here, a bad return, a bad promo, a generally bad storyline. Nothing good was ever going to come of it. Again, this one kinda hurts because when I say I was a huge Razor Ramon and Scott Hall fan, I really mean it. I always thought, and actually still do think, that Razor Ramon was the coolest pro wrestler to ever grace my TV screen, and I would never, ever dream of skipping past a Razor Ramon or Scott Hall match. When the NWO were making their way to WWE in 2002, I was really excited. I know folks were all about Hollywood Hogan, and I fully understand the significance of Hogan making his WWE return, but I was more joyous that Scott Hall was going to get another chance. The way he fizzled out at WCW sucked, and it felt like he never got a chance to write the final chapter of his pro wrestling story. So he had a shot at redemption when making his return to the WWE. Unfortunately, things didn't work out. I still don't see how putting a recovering alcoholic in a room full of beer while holding him hostage is supposed to be entertaining, and it really does seem like one of those terrible Vince McMahon ideas that sole purpose is to humiliate or disenchant guys that he pays to work for him. But Scott also has to take some of the blame too, I guess. He didn't last very long, though he did have some decent match bookings, the biggest of which being a WrestleMania match against Stone Cold Steve Austin at Mania 18. Scott fell off the wagon again. He was released one day after the infamous plane ride from hell, and Scott would find work in TNA after his WWE dismissal. I was heartbroken, man. I wanted to see Scott back in form, but it didn't work out that way. In August 2008, Ken Kennedy, a pro wrestler who the WWE pushed pretty hard, dislocated his shoulder during a house show match. This was another setback for Kennedy, who, at one point in time, seemed destined to be a big player in the WWE. He could talk, he was good in the ring, he was unique in the sense that no one was doing what he was doing during his tenure in the company. So even amidst these setbacks, you always kind of thought that Kennedy would soon be a guy main eventing pay-per-views. Kennedy was on the bench for around 9 months. It was then announced he was coming back, and he was the Raw brand's first pick during the 2009 supplemental draft. And so, on May 25th, Ken made his return in a big 10-man tag team match. Kennedy, MVP, Jerry Lawler, John Cena and Batista versus The Big Show, The Miz and The Legacy. During the match, Kennedy performs a back suplex on Randy Orton, and, well, look at Randy's reaction. The Viper was very annoyed right here, and he'd end up marching straight to the back where he complained about Kennedy being unsafe to anyone who'd listen. Rumour has it that Randy convinced John Cena to complain about Kennedy's ring work too, so the writing was on the wall. Orton argued that the back suplex could have ended his career due to the way he landed, and according to Kennedy, it was the fact that John Cena also complained to Vince McMahon that ultimately led to his dismissal immediately after this match. Whether the Cena stuff's true or not, we really can't confirm, but this is what happened according to Kennedy. Once a bright prospect for the WWE and someone you could have sworn was going to one day be a huge deal, Kennedy's WWE run came to an end after his first match back, making it a pretty terrible return and one that probably made Kennedy a little bitter. Old turncoat Tatanka, eh? His most famous run began in 1991 and he made a name for himself by holding on to an undefeated streak for a very long time. He would later turn heel when joining the $1 Million Corporation, and by this time there really wasn't a whole lot more Tatanka could offer wrestling fans. Like, he turned into one of those dudes who was just always there. In 1996, Tatanka left the WWF citing family and spiritual issues. If you've got any spiritual issues going on, guys, please make sure you let your employer know ASAP. And then Tatanka came back in 2005, where he was mainly featured on the SmackDown brand. This return seemed a bit odd and a bit out of place, but this isn't actually the return I want to talk about. In 2007, Tatanka left again. Not sure if it was spiritual issues or not, but he was seemingly done with the WWE for good. An appearance then took place on Old School Raw in 2010, which, okay, fair enough. It's all about the past with these kind of shows anyway. But then, in 2016, Tatanka was part of WrestleMania 32, where he took part in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. What's so weird about this appearance is that I'm pretty sure it wasn't announced. It wasn't a battle royal filled with legends of the past either, even though it did also include DDP. But even the commentators seemed to just forget the fact that Tatanka had just returned for this match and he was, well, he was just there. Kinda like how he was just there during the later portion of his $1 Million Corporation run. Fans were like, oh shit, is that Tatanka? As they too had to do a double take. And after surviving in the Battle Royal for a decent amount of time, Tatanka went home again. He didn't make any more appearances until showing up for another Legends special episode of Raw in 2021. Just a very weird return here that had zero fanfare and zero purpose. Maybe WWE needed to make the numbers up or something? I don't know. We're going to go back to 1996 for two returns. Both guys were legends during the Golden Era, yet both guys had their own problems during the New Generation era. First, it's the Ultimate Warrior, and you need to hear me out on this one. Warrior came back after a pretty messy falling out with Vince McMahon over money and later drugs misuse. McMahon thought Warrior could be the answer to that big problem over in Atlanta named WCW Nitro. Quite ironic, seeing as Vince and company made fun of WCW on a weekly basis for using superstars of the past, but nonetheless, Warrior came back and all the little Warrior maniacs would tune into WWF once again, or at least that was the plan. His return match was against Triple H, and while the match itself's an easy target for those who want to run Hunter down, it did serve its purpose. Warrior returned with an insane amount of energy, an insane amount of intensity, and he handed out an embarrassing squash defeat over the WWF's future King of Kings. This is all well and good. You can look over it because, well, it is the return of the Ultimate Warrior. But as the weeks went on, the cracks began to show, and it was made very clear that the Ultimate Warrior just didn't suit the WWF's new generation. He wore a baseball cap for the first time ever in a wrestling ring because he wanted to protect his precious head when getting a gimmick picture frame smashed over his noggin. He had a pay-per-view match against Goldust, which was absolutely woeful, but to be fair, Goldust was injured. The thing is though, the WWF really should have found a substitute because 1. They knew Goldust was injured way ahead of time. 2. What they ended up presenting totally sucked and it barely represented a wrestling match. And 3. Not a single person would have cared if the advertised Goldust vs Warrior match didn't happen because it was only an attraction match anyway. Within a few months, Warrior was already missing dates, and apparently he wasn't properly communicating why he was missing those dates. So McMahon let Warrior go again, and the whole return ended up being a bad spell for the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior would claim that he didn't show up due to the death of his father. McMahon said Warrior didn't even have a relationship with his father for the past 10 years, and Warrior disputed this while also saying the WWF owed him merchandise money. Yeah, it's a tough one, but someone's gotta call it out. Jake Roberts' WWF return in 1996 was centered around redemption. Gone was the cold and calculated Jake Roberts of old, and instead we got treated to Bible bashing Jake. You see, Mr. Roberts had seen the light, he was a born-again Christian, and he now carried a giant snake named Revelations. Jake was no longer all about the drink, drugs and partying, he was now spreading the good word and he was thankful for having a second chance. Now, to his credit, Jake could still command the audience, and there definitely were loud DDT chants when Jake performed in the ring, but these performances slowly became worse as time went on. Jake did make an important contribution to pro wrestling in 1996. If he wasn't going full tilt with his whole Christianity gimmick, then we'd never get the famous Austin 3:16 promo. But really, and I hate to be negative, this is probably the only thing of note that Jake accomplished during his 1996 run. The WWF went through the trouble of ridiculing Jake's previous problems with alcohol during a feud with Jerry Lawler. It was then decided that Jake would try his hand at some backstage work, including creative, but this didn't last long at all because firstly, Jake didn't like the backstage stuff and he still wanted to wrestle, and secondly, Jake relapsed and his old demons caught up with him. He showed up on Shotgun Saturday Night on January 25th, 1997 looking like an absolute mess, and the WWE had to let him go shortly afterwards. Like Warrior, Jake's 1996 run can be seen as a bad spell for a once legendary superstar, a time period that kinda hurts his overall legacy. It's a shame too because there's nothing wrong with the message Jake was trying to send, and everyone loves a good redemption story. It's just that Jake wasn't fully in the clear when it came to those past demons, and the WWF didn't really help matters either. Did you know that D'Lo Brown made a WWE comeback in 2008? Yeah, probably not, and that's because it was extremely underwhelming. There's practically not a whole lot you can say about it. To me, D'Lo was one of the unsung heroes of the early Attitude Era. He was extremely reliable when it came to putting on good matches, and in my opinion, the WWF kinda let him down when they couldn't find anything for him to do, and this proved to be the exact same sentiment when D'Lo came back in 2008. Remarkably, he stayed employed for around 7 months. He had a grand total of 52 matches during this period, which is a great number, but only 5 of these matches made it to TV, so it seemed like WWE wanted to use him more for house show matches and dark matches. The thing is, you kinda need a little TV exposure in order for fans to get behind you during those house show matches. I'm sure many people who saw D'Lo live were shocked that he was actually there, and I'm sure many people didn't know he had made a WWE return when they saw him live. 4 out of D'Lo's 5 television matches included Santino Marella. His final TV match saw him take a loss to Mike Knox in Manchester, England, and D'Lo would spend the remainder of the year working for Pro Wrestling Noah and Ring of Honor. Alright, so this one's maybe not a full-blown return, but it was still pretty bad. Big Van Vader, absolute destroyer of men during his heyday, a total monster of a human being with a seriously intimidating presence. Vader joined the WWF with a lot of promise, but as time went on, the WWF let him down big time. He wasn't presented as the unstoppable force who defeated Antonio Inoki, the man who went toe-to-toe with Stan Hansen in one of the most brutal brawls in NJPW history. He wasn't even the same guy who caused major problems for Sting and Cactus Jack in WCW. No, he turned into a guy who felt genuinely hurt when Shawn Michaels belittled him in the middle of the ring. That, of course, wasn't the only issue at play, and really, Vader was booked into some bad feuds that didn't do him any favours, but the allure of Big Van Vader was completely diminished by the time he was done in the WWF. Thankfully, Vader was able to rebuild himself in All Japan Pro Wrestling and he once again became a main player, but Vader was brought back to the WWF in 2005 for a brief appearance when Stone Cold Steve Austin was scheduled to face Jonathan Coachman at Taboo Tuesday. Austin had initially agreed to the match. He then must have remembered he was facing Jonathan Coachman, and apparently he was also booked to lose the match, so Austin ended up pulling out and Batista took his place. Vader and Goldust would stand in the coach's corner for this match. Vader made his big return on the October 31st, 2005 episode of Raw, and when getting out of the ring after delivering a beatdown to Batista, Vader fell on his ass. It was like Vader was cursed every time he came to this company, and the fall right here made the big man look a little silly. It was all for nothing too. Batista would beat Coachman at Taboo Tuesday and Vader would leave WWE once again. If by some miracle you remember this run, I'd guess that the only thing you remember from it is Vader falling on his rear end, though the fall was removed from the WWE Network versions of Raw. I think it's fair to say most people remember the British Bulldog for his WWF runs and not for his time in WCW. But if you go back and check out Bulldog's WCW work in 1993, you might be surprised by how well he did. Most people know about his alliance with Sting and the feud Davey and Sting had with Big Van Vader and Sid Vicious, but I always try to point people to the match he had with Lord Steven Regal at Halloween Havoc. This one was for the TV title. It had a 15-minute time limit. It ends in a draw, unfortunately, due to the time expiring, but those 15 minutes are absolutely wonderful. It really shows how good Davey was when motivated and when he was paired up with the right opponent. Anyway, after this WCW run, Davey went back to the WWF to apply many chin locks. He then returned to WCW after Survivor Series 97, and it's been said that Davey left his enthusiasm for wrestling in Montreal that evening. When Davey showed up on Nitro, he got to work straight away, but as the weeks passed on, he began looking more and more, well, wrecked would be the best way to put it. His face got real bloated looking, his skin would turn purple in the middle of his matches. He looked extremely tired while working Nitro's famously short matches, and when he was afforded some microphone time, he made an embarrassment out of himself. The most famous example being his promo directed at Alex Wright during a WCW Nitro backstage blast. Needless to say, Davy's best days were long behind him. The pills were doing a number on the Bulldog. And even though he cleaned up quite a bit for his eventual WWF return, this WCW run immediately following Montreal is the stuff nightmares are made of. A crying shame and a real fall from grace for Davy Boy Smith. For those who watch Reliving the War with me every week, we're now in the midst of a terrible time period for WCW, but there's one shining light during Nitro television broadcasts, one beacon of hope who delivers insane beatdowns in the ring and even more insane promos, Big Papa Pump Scotty Steiner. In late 2000, Scotty goes full unhinged in WCW and he provides some much needed entertainment during the dark days of the company. The Big Papa Pump character would have fit in nicely to the WWF's Attitude Era had Scott jumped ship during the Monday Night War, but Steiner stayed until the very end, and then he eventually made his WWE comeback at Survivor Series 2002. Scotty was then treated like the belle of the ball. Raw and SmackDown GMs got into a bidding war while trying to lure Scotty to their respective brands. And then, within no time at all, Scott found himself challenging Triple H for the World Heavyweight title. It was a whirlwind push where everything was going well for the big bad booty daddy. Those Triple H matches? Yeah, terrible. Absolutely terrible. Scotty revealed he was suffering from drop foot when those matches took place, which basically means he wrestled with one foot paralysed. There was also folks accusing Triple H of sandbagging Scotty Steiner, including Kevin Kelly and Lance Storm. That's something we can't prove, but we also can't keep digging for excuses when really it is what it is. Two terrible pay-per-view matches back to back. It's crazy because here you have someone in the world title match at the Royal Rumble, the world title match at No Way Out, and then he's completely left off the WrestleMania 19 card altogether. That tells us what the WWE thought of Big Papa Pump, and it tells us how quickly he got relegated after his comeback. An absolute shame too, seeing as Scotty could be quite entertaining when he's allowed to be his usual unhinged, incoherent self. Let me know what other returns were pretty awful in the comments below. Any promotion, any wrestler, let me know your thoughts and let me see what I forgot to mention. It does suck when it's one of your favourites who makes a comeback and the nostalgia you once had gets damaged in the process. It's also pretty bad when you envision what the comeback could be like and then when it happens, it just doesn't play out the way you imagined it to, or the guy or girl in question gets demoted as soon as they return. Whatever the case, let me know your thoughts and I'll read over your comments when the video goes live. Thanks for watching folks, and please take care.